My hometown was surrounded by a snow-covered forest filled with wild animals and, of course, hunters. Among the hunters, there was a young hunter most famous in the area for being a talented marksman. No animal could escape from the barrel of his gun. This young hunter lived with his wife in a small wooden house on the edge of the forest. Every day he went out hunting for food and extra meat to take to the market to make money. The young hunter had a bit of a habit of taking his pet dog. Whenever the dog smelled wild animals from a distance, it would bark loudly to signal the hunter of their presence. Once, the hunter and his pet dog went deep into the forest. As they reached the middle of the forest, suddenly the dog started barking loudly to signal his master of a wild animal nearby. The hunter rushed straight to the location of the dog's signal, only to find a fox looking up at him. The fox had a very distinctive coat of color, which caused greedy thoughts to arise in the hunter's head. Immediately he raised his gun and began to pull the trigger. The sound of gunfire, which exploded quickly, scared the fox deeper into the forest. After the first shot missed completely, the hunter sighed in disappointment and realized that catching this rare fox was not going to be as easy as he thought. He decided he had to catch the fox, so he set up a trap on a tree branch in hope that the fox would return. Afterwards, they returned home after a long, tiring day of hunting. That night, he and his wife ate a full dinner and then returned to the bedroom. As usual, he told his wife stories of what he had encountered while hunting. He laid on the bed hugging his wife and told her that he had seen a rare fox with beautiful fur that would make her fall in love. So she cuddled with her husband, asking him to get her the fox fur to make a wonderful scarf for the upcoming new year. With the habit of pampering his wife, the husband immediately agreed, determined to catch the fox in order to bring the fur as a gift for his wife. The following morning he went out early, straight to the trap. As soon as the dog arrived, it started barking loudly. Then the dog took him to the trap, where he saw that the fox had been stuck with one leg. The hunter looked at the small animal in front of him and smiled happily. He thought that this was the time he had been waiting for. The fox was also aware that it was about to be killed, so it looked up at the hunter with pitiful eyes, 2 lines of tears flowing. Thinking that this would make anyone's heart soft, it only made the hunter more excited. He immediately grabbed a wooden stick and slammed it on the fox's head. The poor little fox died on the spot. The hunter then brought the fox home, stripped it of its skin and fur as a gift to his wife, and the meat was brought to the market for exchange of money. The wife received the fur from the fox and felt extremely excited and happy. She could not hide the fact that she felt so happy about this, so she brought it to the market to show off to the neighbors. Looking at the fox's fur wrapped around the wife's neck, the other woman really admired and praised her. Some people thought that the scarf was just a parody of fox fur, but the wife herself admitted that this was real fur from a real fox. Some people were jealous of the love that the husband showed to the wife, but after listening more, there were others who expressed extreme panic. A woman in the neighborhood immediately made an excuse and returned home, not daring to linger any longer without understanding why. The other woman offered to go home with the wife, willingly asking if the husband would find a similar one to sell her that fur. Those words made the woman who left first feel insecure, but she herself did not know how to say it. The atmosphere between the three immediately appeared awkward and tense when someone discovered the abnormality of the fur. The woman who walked in front of the fox, which was coiled around the wife's neck, was looking at it with worried eyes while the wife was smiling proudly. Suddenly, it came to life, ferociously looking at the woman in front of it, then bared its sharp, scary teeth. As the woman saw this, she got scared and screamed. After that, the two quickly fled. On the way back, the two of them kept talking about the fox fur, and everyone seemed to feel that something was wrong. The neighbors around then began to talk about the safety of the hunter couple, while they were unaware of the dangers lurking in the forest. That night, the couple's house fell into silence, but it was darker and colder than usual. The wife could not sleep all night because she kept hearing the sound of some animal howling on the roof. She immediately turned to call her husband to check on it, but because he was exhausted from hunting, the hunter could only reassure his wife with a few words and then continue to sleep. At this moment, outside the window of the couple's room appeared a dim shadow shaped like a fox with fierce and bright eyes. It rushed from outside and then jumped onto the wife's body, making her whole body heavy. When she opened her eyes, she saw a large fox ferociously looking at her, with its fangs bared as if it was about to eat her alive. The wife woke up. She was so scared that she grabbed the fox fur on her body and threw it straight to the ground. But the nightmare that night was so scary that she felt haunted. She could not sleep, but only stay awake and sit on the bed to watch the fox fur. The following morning, the wife no longer dared to wear that ghostly fur. Her face also became paler than usual. She saw her husband off on the way to the forest as usual, but inside she was telling herself that something bad was about to happen. No matter what she did, her husband still wouldn't believe her. That day, the husband walked all around the forest but still could not hunt a single precious animal, so he returned home disappointed. He stood outside and called the door for a long time but did not see his wife open the door as usual. So he went inside and found that the yard had been empty since when. He loudly called his wife, but she did not answer. The husband immediately felt strange, not knowing where his wife went, but still not coming home on this dark night. He looked for his wife around the house. His hunch immediately took him to the couple's bedroom. The room was still, silent, dark, but inside it appeared cold and gloomy. When the husband opened the door, the scene before him was so terrifying that he couldn't even stand up. His legs suddenly became soft. In the middle of the room was the body of his wife, covered with wounds. Her clothes were covered in blood. She was lying dead on the bed. He did not know what happened while he was away from home. After looking at the wounds on his wife's body, the hunter immediately realized that the wife had been attacked by some wild animal. The hunter seemed to want to go crazy, unable to bear his shock, especially when he saw that his wife had been dead all along. Her body was stiff and pale. He immediately reported this to the police. After investigation and autopsy, police said that his wife was attacked by a large animal and the claws resembled that of a fox. Later, the hunter quit his job and moved to another place to live. The fox fur also mysteriously disappeared. Many people in the village rumored that this was because the hunter and his wife killed the fox, and the fox spirit returned to take revenge. This story was a rather interesting one about a family in the village that I heard from my grandmother when I was young. Villagers said that Mariko decided to go back to her mother's house to visit her mother on a beautiful day because her mother's health had not been good lately. Only her husband and 3 small grandchildren remained at home when Mariko left. Their parents worked away from home, and Mariko usually would be the one to take care of those children. Mariko said that she would stay at her parents' house for 3 or 5 days and she would return once the work was done. At the time, the traffic was not developed, so people here all walked or climbed the mountain by themselves. The way up the hill was quite dangerous. Early the following morning, Mariko unexpectedly returned home. She came back home earlier than expected. When the 3 grandchildren saw Mariko return, they were overjoyed because they thought they would be gifts anyway. The grandson asked, "Ah, grandmother, did you buy us gifts?" But Mariko did not react when she saw her 3 grandchildren. The expression on her face looked rather strange. She entered the house with a cold face. A child asked, What happened to you, Grandma?" The children seemed to be looking forward to gifts from her. After entering the house, Mariko lay down on the bed and covered her head with a blanket without saying another word. Mariko, that day, was acting really strange because she had never felt like that before. The 3 grandchildren saw this, so they played together and did not bother their grandmother anymore. They thought it might be because she was tired from a long trip. It was not until it was dark that the grandfather of 3 children returned from the long day of work. His hunting job was also quite strenuous, and he sometimes faced many dangers. When he entered the house, he was surprised to find Mariko at home. Oddly enough, she didn't answer any of his questions. He walked into the kitchen and saw that it was cold because Mariko didn't cook dinner. The grandfather of 3 children did not complain anymore but started making a fire and cooking a simple meal because this was originally Mariko's job every day. When the 4 grandchildren were eating, Mariko still did not get up. She just lay there silently, not moving and not talking. Her husband looked at Mariko curiously. He did not know what had happened to her, and she was so strange. Mariko did not say anything either. Still pulling the blanket over her head, she remained silent and did not eat or drink anything. After dinner, the family decided to go to bed early because there was nothing left to do. Till night, near midnight, the grandson heard the sound of creaking, strange noises, which startled the boy. The grandson looked over to Mariko and asked, Grandma, what are you doing? Why are you not sleeping?" Mariko said she was eating radish because she was hungry. She suddenly made a tick-crack sound that was very harsh. The mischievous grandson started getting out of the blankets and told her that he also wanted to eat radish. But Mariko refused to let him and told him to go to bed quickly. Mariko still kept pulling the blanket over her head. She made strange noises like she was eating radish all night. This thing made the grandson also curious. She kept making scary, creaking sounds. Until the following morning when dawn had just dawned, the sunlight was shining through the window. The grandson discovered that his youngest sister, who was sleeping next to him last night, was nowhere to be found. Her husband asked Mariko if she knew where the child had gone because last night the whole family was asleep and no one came and not heard the door open or anything. Mariko said that because her aunt missed the granddaughter so much, it was early morning to pick her up. Since this thing happened so often, Grandpa was not surprised, so he let the story go without a doubt. Mariko still wouldn't get up no matter what her husband said. She said she wanted to rest more because she was not feeling well. Feeling worried, her husband planned to take her to the clinic in the village for a checkup. However, Mariko was adamant not to go and said that she just needed to lie down and rest and she would be fine. So her husband didn't say anything, but decided to go out hunting as usual. Before leaving, he did not forget to instruct his 2 young grandchildren at home to take care of their grandmother. If something happened, run and call him immediately. A few hours later, while playing in the yard, the 2 grandchildren heard the door being pushed open. The door pull made a loud sound. The grandson looked in the direction of the door as if sensing something was abnormal. Mariko suddenly appeared and stared at her two grandchildren from the crack of the door. Her eyes were green and the drool from her mouth kept flowing. The grandson was a little scared. Luckily, Grandpa returned timely. The boy told his grandfather that Mariko's green eyes looked terrible. He hurriedly told his grandson to get away and he would go inside and see what was going on. Perhaps he seemed to sense something strange about Mariko too. Grandpa walked slowly into the house, still holding a gun. Mariko then went back to bed and continued to cover herself with a blanket. Grandpa raised his gun to Mariko's head. He looked nervous. A light flared up, a loud sound came out, and bullets were fired by Grandpa. The cotton blanket was dented with holes due to the bullets from his gun. There was a lot of blood. Mariko didn't make a sound. She looked dead. He walked over to the bed, still holding the gun in his hand, and opened the blanket to check. His face was white. His lips were purple. He was sweating profusely. He seemed dumbfounded at the scene before him. In the blanket, there was no Mariko at all. It was a monster covered in hair with its head smashed, looking monstrous and ugly. So, it was this monster that ate Mariko and her poor youngest daughter. As for how Grandpa knew about this thing, it had to start with when he went up the mountain that morning. While he was on patrol in the forest, he came across many crows fighting for food on the ground. He wondered if an animal had died there, so he wanted to go and see what it was. The crows kept swooping down and they were so numerous that he panicked. He saw an older woman lying on the ground. When he looked closely at his clothes and hair, he recognized that it was Mariko, his wife. It turned out she died a long time ago. Immediately he rushed home and killed the monster that turned into Mariko. If he hadn't discovered it in time, perhaps the rest of his family would have been eaten alive. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Kita. I'm a fishing enthusiast and love to go fishing everywhere. The story begins with that day Ken and I went fishing together. We found an interesting new fishing spot over half a month ago. We had chosen a nice spot to take our fishing tackle. At the time, I had a hunch that I would catch loads of fish that day. Ken and I fished together. The river water was clear and the wind blowing was very cool. We sat down and waited for the big fish to take the bait for a while. Suddenly, I felt the urge to urinate. I stood up and said to my friend, "Ken, just wait here for a moment. I need to go pee. I'll be right back." After that, I went to a small forest on the side of the river. Because this riverbank was also empty that day, no one would notice. I thought my need could be solved on the spot. It would be bad if someone saw me, even though the river was empty. I began to pee. It felt so good, but I did not expect that my wrongdoing would cause a series of bad things to happen. Just as I was relaxing, I heard someone calling out to me. At first I thought it must have been the wind howling, and I heard wrong. However, the voice sounded very strange, like someone was calling my name. But I thought to myself that there was no one there. This thing made me feel a bit confused. My first reaction was to be very annoyed when thinking that Ken wanted to scare me. I scolded him a few times, "Stop joking around!" I zipped my pants after I finished. I still felt annoyed at the thought of Ken teasing me. He was teasing me, but there was no one there. I thought Ken was hiding behind a tree. As I immediately turned my eyes to that tree, I couldn't see anyone behind it. I guessed Ken was spotted by me and rushed back to the river. I would give him a few punches to stop him from teasing people like that. When I turned around, Ken was sitting there as if nothing had happened. I thought he was faking it after teasing me earlier. After I finished peeing, I felt like I started to have bad luck. Firstly, not being able to fish. Ken's fishing rod pulled fish continuously. He looked very excited and my fishing rod didn't even move. This was unusual. I'd been fishing for a few hours and I hadn't caught any fish yet, so I decided to go back. Ken and I started the engine and drove home. The river was quiet and a bit scary. On the way home, I chatted with Ken and told him that the day was my unlucky day. Before I finished speaking, my body suddenly trembled. I didn't know what was happening to me. My motorbike had a flat tire. It was bad luck. I checked my motorbike very carefully in the morning, but I didn't understand why it was like this at the time. There was no place for a motorbike repair shop nearby, so my only option was to walk home. The feeling in my heart at that time was both angry and uncomfortable, frustrated. From that day on, bad things kept happening to me. First of all, my house's water pipe broke. I didn't even understand why. My house was completely flooded. The water flowed out. It became like a small island. I hurriedly turned off the faucet. All other houses were affected, but only my house had the problem. Unfortunately, the circuit was connected to the water. The sparks went up. I thought this time I must have died. I could have been electrocuted to death if I hadn't turned the switch off in time, but things still didn't stop there. Unfortunately, things like that kept happening. What happened next was even more terrifying. I received bad luck every day since then. I thought it would be impossible to get rid of. For example, when I was walking normally, there was no stones on the road, but then my foot would suddenly trip and I would fall, and so I fell painfully in front of everyone nearby. It could be considered an accident, but 3 times in a row, I fell on the same stretch of road. There was no way to explain it. And it still didn't end there. The bad luck continued. When I was walking in the street, I didn't see any birds flying. That day, bird droppings would suddenly fall out of nowhere and hit me. Even passerbys thought I was unlucky. The smell of bird poop was horrible. Passers-by would poke fun at my hometown, and I felt nervous and anxious because I didn't know what would happen next. At first, it was just bird droppings, but then it became life-threatening. That day when I crossed the street, I clearly saw the green light, so I didn't think much of it and walked across the street. I calmly walked across the sidewalk because the light was green to allow me to go. I was sure that day I saw the signal light turn green. I promise I was not colorblind or anything. However, a car drove toward me while I was walking. I couldn't react at all because it all happened so fast. The driver lost control and he braked, but it was too late. After the crash, I didn't know anything. I was completely unconscious. My mind went blank. I woke up seeing my parents in the hospital next to my bed. My mother said the traffic police checked the surveillance cameras when I was hit and saw me crossing the street at a red light. But obviously I saw a green light. I didn't think it was weird, and I told my parents what I was going through recently. My parents were also surprised. They thought it was weird, maybe they didn't believe it either. When I got out of the hospital, my mother took me to a man and said he would help me to sort things out. He said I would lose a part of my astral body when I had the bad luck. The situation would get worse and worse and eventually I would die. He asked me what I was doing during that time. After listening to my story, I finally told him about the forest where I fished. It turned out that I didn't pee on a normal high mound like I thought I did. When I went for that pee, I peed on a dead person's grave. The man quickly helped me resolve and correct my mistakes. And after that, everything went back to normal. But luck had not come back to me yet. I hoped that everything would get back to normal soon. And since then, I have never dared to urinate in the public ever again. It is a true story that I witnessed and remembered since I was a child. This story was the scariest one in my memory, and it remained a mystery to this day. I was in my teens then. That day, while I was playing a game with the children in the village, this story happened. In the distance, I could see several people in the village carrying Ricky on their backs. After seeing that, I turned to my friend in surprise and asked, what was wrong with him? Ricky was completely unconscious and was carried on his back by Uncle Kang. The two men accompanying Uncle Kang tried to carry Ricky into the house with heavy steps. The night before, I heard my mother say that Ricky didn't come home all night. His wife looked for him everywhere but couldn't find him. At this time, we kids curiously flocked to Ricky's house to see the situation. We eagerly ran into Ricky's house. As a result, when we ran into the door, Uncle Kang stopped us and did not let us in. "Don't come in here to make trouble!" We were furious because we were really all curious about what had happened. I thought about peeking in through the window. I signaled to my friends, go to the window." A few of us started to squeeze and tried to look inside. I saw Ricky lying motionless on the bed, breathing weakly. His wife was trying to wake him up, but Ricky was just lying there. His wife cried a lot. Ricky did not wake up no matter how his wife called him. After that, Ricky's wife turned to ask Uncle Kang how to find him. So Uncle Kang started telling the story of how Uncle Kang saved Ricky. That morning, just after dawn, Uncle Kang woke up and led the cows up the mountain. When entering the forest, something happened that caught Uncle Kang's gaze. His face showed panic. He seemed to have seen someone. A man was sitting leaning against a tree with his head drooping, motionless. Uncle Kang walked closer and saw that the man was Ricky. Uncle Kang then suddenly remembered the night before Ricky's wife told him Ricky was out drinking, but why was Ricky sleeping in the forest? Uncle Kang called two people to come along to help him together because Ricky was very heavy. Uncle Kang could not carry him alone. They placed Ricky on Uncle Kang's back to carry him. If Uncle Kang didn't see Ricky at that time, I don't know what would have happened. But no matter what, Ricky couldn't wake up. No one knew what was happening. Uncle Kang had an idea that pinching people might work. He then told Ricky's wife to push her thumb into Ricky's nose. After pressing his nose a few times, Ricky snorted and opened his eyes. So this method really worked. When Ricky's wife saw that he was awake, she breathed a sigh of relief and joy. Ricky started panicking, looking as if he had just seen a ghost. With a voiceless scream, he began to back away from fear. Everyone present was puzzled and surprised. Ricky sat huddled in the corner, muttering something with his face pale from trembling. He must have encountered something terrible. It's a demon with no face. Please, don't come near me. Stay away from me. Ricky kept repeating that he had met a demon, and that demon had no face. We stood outside the window eavesdropping, but we didn't understand what Ricky said. When we saw Uncle Kang, another man came out. Uncle Kang was angry because he still saw us out there. He shouted and chased us home. We immediately ran home for fear of Uncle Kang, who would give us each a stick on the bum. Uncle Kang was known for being strict, so all the children in the village were afraid of him. That night, I went home and had dinner with my family. The atmosphere around was quiet. My mother brought delicious food to the table and I ate until I was full. Everyone in the house kept talking about Ricky's story because everyone found it strange. Taking this opportunity, I asked my grandmother what it was like to talk about a faceless person like Ricky, because this story was a very mysterious one. My grandmother said it wasn't a human, but a monster in human form, or maybe it was a ghost. People walking at night would meet a person like that, or an apparition. It seemed that the story was quite similar to the legend of Slender Man. This man looked much taller than the average person. He was about 2 meters tall. Someone saw him wearing white clothes that looked like a ghost. Several other people also saw him wearing black clothes, looking very mysterious and scary. Although very tall, the man walked very fast on the road and did not make a sound. Anyone who wanted to go with him would have to catch up with him, but should never talk to him. If you looked directly into his face, terrible things would happen to you. You would notice that he had no face, with no eyes, nose, mouth, nothing, just completely blank, like the face of a faceless demon. If anyone saw such a white face at night, no one would be without fear. In case, if you ran into him and ran away, he wouldn't chase you. He would stand there. Even though he had no face, you could still feel his smile. Those who saw him without dying would fall seriously ill. If anyone met him, they would have to live in pain or illness or die. No wonder Ricky was scared. That night it was certain that Ricky had encountered this faceless man. My grandmother said that someone got their wish by meeting the faceless man in some places. Of course, those were all legends. Since then, the image of the man without a face became an interesting thing to me. For many years I was worried if whenever I saw a tall person walking at night, it would be him. I would look at their faces to see if they were faceless demons or maybe Slender Man. One was to confirm if the legend was true or not, and the other was to try and see if my wish came true. I am in my 30s now, and I have never met a man without a face. I have met some people who told me stories related to him, like in my hometown. By the way, Ricky died at the age of 35, only 3 years after that event. I didn't know if it was because he met the man without the face or not. I want to tell you a true story that I experienced myself. It has haunted me for many years. Back then, when I was in elementary school, I played with 2 of my classmates. They were twins. The older sister's name was Lili, and the younger sister's name was Lala. Although they were twins, their personalities were completely different. Lala was especially happy, and Lili always had a cold face. Actually, I was closer to Lala, but I couldn't separate the 2 of them, so we all were often together. That summer, when I was playing shuttlecock kicking in front of the door, Lila and Lala's mother brought them over. Lala was a hyperactive girl, so as soon as she saw me, she immediately ran over. They were on their way to Grandma's house, but when she saw me, Lala wanted to come and play shuttlecock kicking with me. Lala's mother urged her to leave because to get to their grandmother's house, they had to cross a big river, and there were only 2 boat trips a day. They were afraid of missing the boat, so she urged them to leave. Lala continued to play shuttlecock kicking with me and decided not to go to Grandma's house anymore. She wanted to stay there and play with me. Lala didn't seem to be interested in going back to Grandma's house either. She preferred to play with me too. Lala's mother also happily agreed and told her that she would come back tomorrow to take Lala home. And the sad story also happened on that day. The day no one wanted it to happen. The tragedy of the story also begins here. Due to the high water level of the river, when the boat was running, it hit a big rock under the water. Because the rock was hidden, people couldn't see it, of course. Lila was swept away by the water because she couldn't swim. She tried to get help in vain, and everyone else was fine because they could swim. The boat capsized. Lila struggled in the cold and strong currents, and Lila's body was found downstream 2 days later. After Lila's death, her mother cried every day. She hugged Lila's clothes because she missed her daughter so much. Compared to Lala, her mother loved Lila more because Lila was a very good girl. After Lila's death, the mother always found Lala unsatisfactory, or compared to the two of them and everything. For her, Lala was like a burden in the house. Days later, Lala could not go to school anymore. I felt very worried for her, so I told my mother about this. I also was worried about her and missed her, but her mother had become very rude, so I didn't dare to visit their home. My mom said I'd better go and see how Lala was doing and what I could do to help her because Lala was my only best friend after all. After that day I went to school as usual, and Lala's absence really worried me. Lala didn't go to school at all, so what happened to her? I visited Lala, but no one was at home. I called out loudly. The house made me shiver for a moment. It looked quite gloomy. And as I was glad because I seemed to hear Lala calling me in, it turned out she was still in the house. At least I knew that maybe Lala was fine. Lala's room was dark, with all the curtains so tight that no light could see through. The room was cold as if no one lived there. I couldn't see anything when I went in because the room was really dark. There was absolutely no light. It was getting darker and darker. Everything was kind of blurry. She was standing in the corner, but why she didn't turn on the light, this confused me. Lala looked like a ghost wandering around the room. I asked her why she pulled all the curtains during the day. Lala seemed to be scared of something. Lala said she was sick and she was afraid of light. But what was wrong with being afraid of the light? This made me extremely confused and a little curious. Then she walked up to me and took my hand. A chill ran down my spine. I felt like a corpse's arm was holding my hand. I saw her hands were wet and full of water. I didn't understand what was happening. Why Lala looked like she came up from the river, wet, slimy and cold. She said she took too much medicine that made her sweat a lot, and also because she just washed her hands. Even though Lala said that, I still didn't feel well. I didn't take it too seriously. I just talked to her and said that these past few days I missed her very much. She suddenly asked me with a cold expression, "What about Lili? Did I remember Lili?" Lala's question made me freeze because I was a bit surprised. I was a bit confused too by Lala's question, but I thought I should tell the truth, and I said, "No." Lala heard this and threw my hand away. She was really strange today. Lala's voice was like coming from some faraway underworld. She seemed angry and turned to ignore me. I'd never seen Lala like that, because before, Lala had never looked at me with such eyes. I felt like I said something wrong, so I apologized to her. I thought it must have been my mistake, so I was quite embarrassed. She told me to leave her alone because she did not want to play with me anymore, which really upset me because I only had Lala as my best friend. I just thought Lala was so weird that day. She didn't smile at all and her behavior was weird too. But I thought she might be thinking of her sister, so I don't blame her. Since that day, Lala had always been like that. She ignored me for days and it made me really sad. She never admitted to what she said or did to me. It seemed like Lala didn't remember anything from that day. Well, I didn't care too much either, as long as Lala came back as happy as before and didn't ignore me anymore. But this was not the case. From time to time, Lala was like a lost soul. so I asked her to come over to do homework. Lala still didn't say a word. But Lala had always been cold to me, and she used the excuse to go home to help her mother. Now that I thought about it, sometimes she was Lala. Sometimes she was Lai. But I hadn't seen her in years. I don't know what her life is like now. There is a strange thing that happened to me at the school that I was attending. I have witnessed a horrible thing happening, and I was haunted by it. I was playing with my phone in the dorm room that day because I was free and had nothing to do. My classmate Ken came over and asked me to go have some fun with him. He looked so excited. "Wait a minute, I need to finish the game." But what's so fun about that? He said that some of his classmates were playing some kind of pen fairy or something, like a Ouija board game. It sounded like fun, so I quickly went with him. We were looking forward to seeing what the game was like. And I realized that it wasn't just the two of us who wanted to see the fun. It seemed that the game, Ken said, was really interesting to attract so many people. There were a lot of students running to the platform on the side of the dormitory building. Perhaps they were also curious about the exciting game that was being played. I stepped forward so that I could see with my own eyes. I pushed through the crowd, and it seemed that all the students of the dormitory were gathered there. I saw 3 of my classmates sitting around a table. I wondered what crazy things these 3 guys were up to. There was a piece of paper on the desk with numbers and symbols written on it. The 3 of them took a pen together and circled something inside the thick piece of paper filled with symbols and numbers. Then we started chanting some spells. Fairy pen, you are my past life. We were surprised because we didn't understand what the hell they were saying. The 3 of them took turns reading. You are my life. Please continue to be with me. Quickly appear, quickly appear. They were probably using this method to summon a fairy pen to appear. This game was like a Ouija board game because you would also be chanting to summon spiritual forces. But after they chanted the spell, the pen didn't move. The pen remained still, proving that there was no fairy pen here. Some viewers thought it was just a meaningless game, but others did not think so. They thought that there was a demonic force that existed. One of the 3 asked again, "Is the fairy pen here? If so, please move the pen." The 3 continued to chant spells and do crap. But to everyone's surprise, this time the pen moved. It did not stand still like before. And the pen moved and drew an irregular circle on the paper. No one knew what the pen was trying to say. Everyone present held their breath in anticipation. At this moment, the viewers were all very nervous. Everyone developed a cold sweat because no one thought that such a myth could happen in front of their eyes. And then one of those 3 asked a question. What day is it today? To check whether some fairy or demon was really here or not, the pen moved again and pointed to this day. The 3 of them looked at each other. They were amazed. Another asked about this age. Pen fairy, how old am I? And the pen answered correctly. In the presence of the people there, the pen moved to the right place with the age of the person asking the question. At that time, not only were the 3 people very tense, but the viewers also became very tense. Someone looked into the glass window on the edge of the platform. Something was quite unusual. There was a reflection of these 3 in the window, but something was not quite right, and the horror started here too. Instead of 3 shadows or reflections, because 3 people were playing this game, over here there were 4 shadows. It was clear that not only the appearance of 3 of my friends, but also an extra person. One of them looked like a cloud of black smoke, but that person was darker than the smoke, and no one knew when that young man appeared. Just then, One of the three seemed to sense this as well and stepped back. It seemed he had sensed danger. He pulled his hand away from the pen as if to end the game. He guessed the danger was ahead of him if he kept playing, and he actually decided to stop the game and get out of his seat. He couldn't stay calm anymore. He was totally panicked. The other two seemed very scared too. If they were really playing this game and stopped midway, then it would have been a disaster. They bet their lives on the game of chance. The young man who had just left suddenly vomited violently when he had only taken a few steps away. He ran to the bathroom and a few of us ran after him. As he went to the bathroom and started vomiting violently, all of us there were dumbfounded because we didn't know what was wrong with him. The scene was horrible. The smell of his vomit had a sour and foul stench as if he had eaten dirt which swelled up in his stomach. The liquid he vomited was black and super disgusting. It was slimy. As we all got out of the restroom, we heard a loud bang on the platform as if something had fallen from upstairs. Then I saw loads of students standing on the railing and looking down. Myself and my friend also ran over curiously and looked down below. That was the first time I'd seen such a horrifying scene. The two fairy pen players from earlier jumped down from upstairs. It was terrifying. They seemed to die right there, leaving no chance of survival. Many of the people there took out their mobile phones to take pictures, and some posted them on the internet. Just as everyone was looking down the stairs, it didn't seem to end here. The crowd started screaming like something was terrible. A girl suddenly screamed violently and ran away. She kept calling for a pen. And more than one or two people jumped out of the building that night too. Things got way scarier when the player left the game and suffered the punishment of the soul. This fairy pen game was no different from the Ouija board game. After that incident, the rumors spread more and more. At the time, many people were present to watch the game. Those were the ones who would wake up the next morning with dark circles under their eyes, and they would stay swollen for a few days. The person who vomited took a few days off. I prefer not to mention the school I was attending at this point, just to avoid causing trouble, because this is indeed a true story. Today I will tell you a famous ghost story of a restaurant in Guangzhou, China. Since the opening day, the restaurant's business was very prosperous. It was profitable, and diners from many places near and far came there more and more. This restaurant was a wooden structure with 3 floors. It has undergone many repairs so far over 200 years. This incident happened in 1985. It was said that a newlywed couple booked a party at the restaurant to hold their wedding. The restaurant was also very attentive. They also invited a very lively drum and trumpet band to join the wedding fun. Guests and friends came to congratulate and sat at dozens of tables. Everyone clapped, cheered, and shouted with excitement to celebrate the happiness of the young couple together. Friends and relatives all came to celebrate with their families. They took turns toasting the newlyweds and hoping that the couple would always be happy. At the party there was a little girl among the guests. Her face did not look very happy. She seemed to have encountered something. It seemed that the little girl smelled the burning smell of something, so she told the adults at the table as well as her mother. But her mother said that she didn't smell any burning there. People continued to ignore the girl because they didn't smell any burning like she said. They continued to stand up to celebrate with everyone. The little girl who told everyone before that she smelled burning now said that she saw smoke coming out of a house. The fire flared up fiercely. It was already red in the whole area. People didn't seem to feel the danger approaching. The fire might have burned everything. It spread at dizzying speed. It spread it without stopping. It burned quickly and burned all the curtains. The fire continued to burn and consume everything it passed by. It became more and more intense, but people still didn't seem to know that this was happening. The restaurant was entirely a structure built of wood, so the fire could easily be formed in an instant. It wasn't until the guests at the party began to smell the smoke that they noticed the fire was spreading to every corner and that everything and everyone was on fire. They began to run up the stairs desperately. They screamed, one running on top of the other to find a way to escape. In the thick smoke, men, women, and children ran. They ran after their survival instincts, trying to find every opportunity to find a way to live. The restaurant's stairs leading down was steep and narrow. It couldn't hold everyone if they jostled each other up, and all ran down to try to get out. Before going down the stairs, flames rose from the lower floor. It seemed to want to block all exits so that it could burn everyone, including humans. Everyone seemed to want to go back up the stairs because the fire in front of them had almost burned part of their bodies. There were screams and a panic that began to ring. The guests cried out in despair, and the heat of the fire was terrible. Many people were engulfed in flames. They had no way out. They shouted as much as they could, but the fire swallowed them whole. Among the guests who could not escape, there was a man whose whole body was on fire. He rushed to the window. The others had the same fate as him. Their whole bodies were on fire. The flames completely consumed them all, and everyone rushed to the windows. Unable to withstand the terrifying heat of the fire, those who burned in the night glowed like red torches, one by one falling from the third floor to the ground. Passers-by who saw the terrible scene also panicked and wanted to find a way to rescue them, but were helpless because the fire was just too big. The whole building was engulfed in flames. Not a corner was without fire. The fire had completely consumed everything from things to people. Firefighters spent hours trying to put out the flames as quickly as possible, but the flames were too big to save anyone's life. When the fire was completely extinguished, the restaurant, which was originally magnificent, was now only a pile of ashes. Almost everything was in ruins. All were burned by the fire. Looking at this place then was no different from places that had been abandoned for many years, surrounded by the smell of burning corpses. Dozens of people were also burned to death. Bodies were scattered on the stairs, and wedding guests were then only burnt skeletons. Everyone remained the same as they were consumed by the flames. Faces were trying to scream for help, and they stretched out their arms to wait for help. On the seventh night since the terrible fire broke out, the flow of people was still passing by. As usual, the restaurant then looked extremely dilapidated. Some neighbors lived near the area next to the restaurant, and they all heard the sound of drums and trumpets shaking the quiet area. The sound was getting closer and closer. The closer it got, the louder the sound, as if some event was about to happen. That shrill sound came from the window. Everyone thought it was the house where the wedding was held, but there was no way that a family could hold a wedding at such a late night. The sound of drums and trumpets resounded deafeningly, making everyone unable to sleep. Many people got up and opened their windows to look outside to see what was going on. And they were extremely surprised when for the first time in their lives they saw such a strange sight with their own eyes. They saw a very large group of people, young and old. All were full. In the middle was a red flower palanquin. They sang while going to the restaurant where the fire broke out. All of them stopped in front of the restaurant, but these people were silent. No one uttered a word, unlike the excitement from before. After a while, suddenly everyone started to cry loudly. Young and old, everyone was screaming and crying. Something black, as if it were liquid, flowing out from the lot of the people's eyes, which looked scary. The sound of crying went straight to the eardrums. That made everyone feel uncomfortable. Those who mourned, their eyes were black. People didn't dare to listen to these sounds. They all closed their doors at the same time so they didn't have to hear anything about this devil's cry. The people who accompanied the flower float stood in front of the restaurant and cried all night. The crying echoed, and everyone could hear. This continued until the sun rose the next day. The sun gradually illuminated all things. The glittering rays gradually appeared. All of the people from last night disappeared, and that night the first 7 people burned to death in the restaurant were the people who sang. After that, the investors had to renovate the burned restaurant to restore what the fire had caused. During the renovation, there was a carpenter who encountered something strange. Everyone who was involved in the rebuilding of the restaurant was present. The carpenter was just doing his job when he suddenly stopped. He looked very scary, and there was something very unusual about him. He was like a lost soul. People called him, but he didn't hear them. It was like someone was hypnotizing him. As he slowly started walking straight to the window. Colleagues did not even react in time and tried to call him back, but he completely lost his mind. He jumped out of the window to the bottom. He fell and died on the spot, and everyone knew then that he had no reason to commit suicide. A few days after that suicide, another worker suddenly climbed onto the table in the middle of the working day. It was like he was being controlled by someone. He sang Cantonese opera. While he was from another region, he couldn't even understand Cantonese opera. They said he was probably harassed by some spirit that died in the fire. After multiple attempts, the restaurant was rebuilt, but in the end, it was still demolished in 2006. Strange things about it have been handed down to this day. This is what happened to my friend. Even when I thought about that, I was still terrified of it, and it still haunted me to this day. I was having a relaxing time that night while playing some games. I like to play raids, and this was my only hobby. My work was also quite easy. After I came home from work, I sat at the computer to play a few games to relieve the stress. The evening was my favorite time. I was about to go to war in the game when suddenly my phone rang. It was late at night and I was curious to who was calling, and late calls really pissed me off. Because I didn't want to miss the game, I didn't want to pick up the phone, but just glanced to see who was calling and who was disturbing me at this hour. It was from my good friend. His name was Ben. He grew up with me when we were little, and then we went to the same university again. I reluctantly picked up the phone. I didn't know if it was so urgent that he called me at this late at night, even though he was a close friend, because that was my resting time. Well, as a result, it wasn't my friend Ben. It was someone from the hospital who called from his phone. My mind started to get confused with a lot of thoughts. I quickly went to the hospital, although the person on the phone didn't say what happened to my friend. It was probably very urgent, so I quickly left. I got dressed and ran downstairs. I was really worried about Ben. Maybe he had an accident or something. So he was rushed to the hospital. I called a taxi and asked the driver to take me to the hospital. Fortunately, in the middle of the night, I still could catch a taxi. The car rushed to the hospital. The scene outside was now pitch black. The traffic was also not crowded, and there were only a few taxis on the road then. On the way, many people were burning votive papers. I suddenly remembered that today was the day of worshipping the dead soul. On this day, paper money for dead souls was everywhere on the street. When I got to the hospital, I was called in by a nurse, and she told me that my friend was in the operating room. She called me after looking at my friend's phone with my phone number. He was taken to the operating room. His condition must have been very serious. I rushed in and asked, "Did he really have an accident? I pray he's okay." Luckily, he seemed to be fine. So I asked him what happened. "Are you okay? What happened to you?" He seemed to have just woken up, and he couldn't remember what happened. The nurse asked me to pay for his hospital bills and needed to rest now. Then I went out with the nurse. On the way, she told me about Ben's condition. The nurse said Ben was brought to the hospital in a very strange and very scared state. A taxi driver took him to the hospital and called the emergency room. At first she thought it was the driver who caused the accident of Ben. Then Ben was screaming in pain, his face was sweaty and pale, and Ben seemed to have no strength left. His belly was distended and swollen like a pregnant woman's. His shirt seemed to have broken all the buttons, and he looked like he had been hit by evil or had eaten something, so he was poisoned. He was given a gastric lavage after the examination. Even the cleaning process took a long time, but fortunately he was brought here in time, or he might have not been saved. The nurse said he spat out a lot of strange things. They didn't know what he ate, but the horrible stench was overwhelming. When I finally understood Ben's condition, I went to the ATM to withdraw money and take it to pay for his hospital bills. When I returned to the hospital room, my friend Ben became more awake. He told me what he remembered, and Ben began to recount. His face was still showing horror. He said that after coming home from work, he and his colleagues went out together to drink. After drinking too much, Ben was not sober. They said goodbye to each other, and Ben seemed to be drunk. He could no longer stand properly. Because the street was dark and he was drunk, Ben quickly wanted to take a taxi home. I didn't know what happened, and I just had to listen to his story. Then Ben's legs started to wobble. He couldn't stand anymore and fell to the ground. Ben was dreamy in his drunkenness. His face was red, and he was surrounded by a bunch of fruit that rolled from nowhere. Ben saw some apples on the edge of his head. He wasn't awake at the time, so he picked an apple and picked it up. Ben started to put the apple in his mouth. His mouth opened wide to bite the ripe apple. While he was eating, he felt someone standing next to him. He glanced up. He was still chewing on an apple in his mouth. It was a strange man. He was very tall. The old man angrily glared at Ben, as Ben had just committed something terrible. Now Ben looked closely, and he saw that his face was very strange. The man didn't look like a normal person at all. He seemed to be paying attention to the apples. Ben quickly picked up another apple from the ground and gave it to the man. At this moment, a car drove up, its light shining on him, but strangely the car had no intention of rebuilding. More frightening, the car hit the old man, but strangely he suddenly disappeared like smoke. The car also stopped in front of Ben. It almost hit him. The driver poked his head out and howled at Ben. "Hey, you want to die? What the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!" My friend suddenly felt an unbearable stomach ache, and he started to sweat a lot. In pain, he screamed, clutching his stomach and rolling around on the ground. The kind driver put him in the car and took him to the hospital. When I heard him say that he ate something on the ground, I suddenly thought of something. On the way to the hospital, I also saw a lot of people burning things on the side of the road. Today is the day they worship dead people. The apples my friend picked up on the ground were offered to the dead. Most likely, the old man he saw was a ghost. My friend was punished, or maybe cursed, and he almost lost his life. Is it true as they say? The dead will always claim their things back. This story happened about 2 years ago. It was the darkest day of my life, and I am still haunted by the events of that year to this day. Because of work and life pressure, I suffered from severe insomnia and mild depression. So much had happened to me, and it made me really tired, and I gradually fell into a deadlock. The doctor prescribed me a lot of medicine and told me to remember to drink the drugs on time, get enough rest, and not stay up late to recover quickly. My boss also fired me because I could not guarantee the company's work. Fortunately, I had a good boyfriend. My boyfriend was always with me. He always supported me in everything. And because of that, I had more motivation to get well quickly. My boyfriend's house was in the city, and I was in the countryside. Part of the pressure also came from our love story. His family didn't accept me because my situation and his were very different. His parents expected him to find a daughter-in-law who was also suitable for his family. Meanwhile, my family was not well off. He said his mother invited me to his house for dinner, but it seemed that his mother didn't like me at all. She invited me to come, perhaps to let me think for myself and withdraw. My boyfriend encouraged and supported me a lot at the time. If it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have made it through what happened. I really wanted to marry him and prepare for a future life with him. However, his family was a big obstacle for me. Maybe I chose the wrong time to meet his parents. While I was suffering from mental problems and my health was declining, I went to see his parents with a tired appearance. The meal that day was rich with many dishes, but I hardly touched my chopsticks. His mother said that he and I were very young, so marriage should be carefully considered. Although his mother didn't say it directly, his mother always wanted us to separate. I even thought that I really didn't deserve their son, and I thought he would listen to his parents and leave me soon. On the way home at this time it was already dark, and there were very few people passing by. He and I went together, but no one said any word to anyone. He reassured me that he would work hard for our future, but I felt that even if he and I got married, life would not be easy. Maybe in the next day or two we should stop seeing each other temporarily. That night I had to take sleeping pills to be able to sleep. As soon as I fell asleep, I was awakened by the vibrating sound of my phone, and it was none other than a text from my boyfriend. As a hunch, I had a bad feeling when my boyfriend texted me at this hour. He wanted to spend quality time with his mother, and his mother would accept me, but he was forced by her to marry someone else. My boyfriend wanted us to be apart for a while, but it was all too understandable that he wanted to break up with me. The news really shocked me and I cried a lot. I really couldn't accept it. I felt like I had nothing left. At this point I lost everything. I was empty-handed. I lost my job and now I couldn't keep my lover. I didn't know how long I cried until my mind went numb and I fell asleep. I couldn't think anymore and I slowly fell into a dream. After I fell asleep, I suddenly felt that there was another person in my room, but I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move and I couldn't see the stranger's face. He carefully walked over to my bed and crept up step by step. Then he started to say something in my ear with a strange voice. "Are you desperate?" Every time he said a word, my heart broke. He continued to say, "No one cares about you. No one cares about your life, even if you die." He was right. I shouldn't live anymore because when I was young, my parents wanted me to die to give birth to another brother. From childhood to adulthood, no one acknowledged me and no one liked me, not even my boyfriend. And in the 30 years of my life, I have done nothing, with no house and no car in my hand. At that point, I just wanted to end my life. And that man said he would help me. He helped me up and then he continued to whisper that he would get me free. I grabbed the rope. I looked up at the roof with my mind completely blank. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. And on the ceiling there was no place or crossbar to tie the rope. He helped me. He took my arm and I obeyed him completely. He went to the headboard and tied one end of the rope to the headboard. My heart was confused. I didn't want to die. My body didn't listen to me. After he finished tying the rope, he turned to give it to me. I started wrapping the rope around my neck. At this point, I still didn't realize what I was doing. I leaned forward and the tight zipper pulled my neck back. I was short of breath for a moment. My tears were also flowing a lot. I rolled my eyes and my consciousness became hazy. I started to feel everything go dark in front of me. As soon as I sobered up a bit, I heard the loud knocks. The sound was far from too near, from dim to clear. I had become more conscious but couldn't get rid of the rope. After a moment of sobriety, I saw the ceiling appear clear, no longer blurred. I opened my eyes. My whole body was drenched in sweat, and I found myself still lying on the bed. And it was my boyfriend who was knocking on the door. He was outside, banging on the door and screaming. I looked around the house, surprised to see no one. I felt like I just had a dream. It was a real nightmare. I climbed out of bed and went to open the door for my boyfriend. My boyfriend immediately rushed over and hugged me. He asked me to forgive him. His appearance that night saved me and my life. We then decided to get married, and his family gradually accepted me. I got a new job and also moved into his house. But one day, I read some scary news. In my old motel room, a young man committed suicide due to depression, and he also committed suicide exactly the way I dreamt about it that very night. This story originated from a hobby of mine. I love collecting antiques, and it was this hobby that got me involved in a very peculiar incident. I loved buying weird antiques. The appearance of those items also had to be very special to attract my attention, and the best place to buy these was at the antique market. It was busy there, with buyers and sellers coming in and out. I couldn't distinguish between real and fake antiques because many of the fake ones were carved very accurately. I loved going to the antique market. In addition to real and fake antiques, there were many other things such as food, fruit, clothes, etc. It was interesting to watch buyers and sellers bid against each other. I went to the antique market when I had nothing to do that day, but no antique caught my attention. When I passed a few stalls, some things placed on the ground attracted me. I had found something I liked. It seemed that the thing in front of my eyes was rare and also very strange. That item held me back. I saw a lot of skulls on the same stall, and I had never seen such strange items before. Those skulls were inlaid with silver, some inlaid with precious stones. They were all intricately carved, and they had different beauty. I also felt that these skulls were very unusual, so I sat down and looked at them. They were eye-catching, and they had been sculpted wonderfully. I picked up one and said to the owner, "Is this a real antique?" He said they were handcrafts and not antiques, but these were very rare. I wanted to buy one, so I asked him about its price. I also thought its price would not be low because it looked very different. "You will love this vase. Congratulations, it has found an owner." I was curious about what the owner said, but I liked this vase. The owner told me that this vase was imported directly from Nepal by him. The owner also told me to rest assured about its quality. After a while of bidding, I bought one at a reasonable price. I felt happy that I got such a unique item. I brought that skull home. It was probably one of the fanciest items I had gotten my hands on until now. I added it to my collection, and the more I looked at it, the more I liked it. The vase had a beauty that made people feel a little bit of a shiver. It was kind of a combination of death and art because it looked so magical. I already had all the items I liked, and I put the vase in the most prominent place. Horrible things happened that night. I never thought it was that skull that brought me terrible nightmares. That night I went to bed as usual after a long tiring day at work. I had a strange feeling even though I was fast asleep. I felt like someone was staring at me while I was sleeping. I couldn't bear the feeling anymore, so I started looking in the direction. Then I saw something stand beside my bed. I had yet to react to what was in front of my eyes. In front of me appeared to be a very large fat man, but because it was so dark, I couldn't see clearly. My eyes continued to look upward to see that it was indeed a man. Terrified when I realized it was a man without a head, his upper body was empty. My sleepiness disappeared when I witnessed a horrible scene. I sat up in panic. a look of terror on my face. But when I sat up, the man was gone. I sat there stunned for more than 10 seconds, checking myself to see if I was awake or dreaming. I didn't think it was a dream, so I got out of the bed and wanted to go to the living room to check. As a result, there was nothing in the living room. Everything was not what I expected. I suddenly thought of the skull that I bought from the antique dealer. I thought I could see something terrible, but I didn't see anything either. That skull was still on display, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. I didn't know why I thought of that headless man relating to this skull. I went back to bed and started going back to sleep, hoping I wouldn't have any more nightmares. Not long after I lay down, I felt the headless man standing next to my bed again. I didn't wake up this time. I wanted to see what he would do. That man just stood beside my bed without moving. He didn't move and I didn't dare to move. I just pretended to be asleep while laying there. And I stayed like that until the dawn dawned and sunlight began to shine into my room. When the headless man was no longer standing on the bed, I dared to stand up. I thought the problem was with that skull, so I took a day off from the company and brought the skull to the antique market. The stall where I bought the skulls had no stalls and was not fixed in place. I asked the stall owner next door if he knew the Nepalese man selling there. That stall owner told me that the Nepal owner was taken away by the police. I thought that maybe he had committed a crime by selling a real human skull. This thought made me have to guess old and young because I didn't know how true it was. I stood there dumbfounded because I didn't know what to do. I exited the antique market and turned into a small alley nearby. I looked at the skull and wondered if it was a real skull. After thinking about it, I decided to send it to the police station. I explained everything and the police did not confuse me with it. The police jotted down a few details and said that if there was any problem, they would get back to me. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They said the Nepal owner was a smuggler of real skulls from Nepal. I had goosebumps at that time when I thought about that picture of me playing with a skull.